environmentally, economically, socially, the separation between church and state, synagogue and state. So many like really deep divisive issues there that are put on hold because the idea of security is much more dramatic, and so it's run by politicians. And the great thinkers of Israel are not given the honor they deserve. So who speaks for Israel? Who runs the country? Is those tough guys who were able to, who were able to work up the tough political ladder and get into a position of power. So the representatives of Israel are not the great thinkers of Israel, and that's sad.
And I think the Orthodox are the least obsessed about the peace process. I think the Orthodox in Israel and the diaspora are like losing time from study of Torah, worrying about the peace process. Like the Orthodox are the least concerned about the peace process, the most at home with the world is often going to hate us, and our duty is just to study the Torah and perform it. And what the Goyim do, we're not much concerned about.
Yeah, I think with the religious Zionists in Israel are going through a big transition right now because they have lost some of their appeal to the rest of Israel. So there's an attempt to sort of reconnect because they went so far with the love of the land. Sort of a little bit of what we talked about today.
Yeah.
This sort of the land can become a type of obsession. And if you go on the West Bank in Judea and Samaria, you get it.
Yeah.
You feel you're living in the Bible.
Yeah.
All these. If you study the Parsha like this week,
yeah.
And then,
and
then you go and you drive around Judea and Samaria, you get the goosebumps. Because if you're a religious Jew who studies the Parsha deeply,
yeah,
you're saying, my God, I am walking where Moses walked, and
right.
I'm walking my ancestors. So you get this biblical attachment to the land that can blind you.
Yeah.
It can blind you to the other attachments that are needed as Jews, which is the attachment to other Jews, the attachment to the world, and the attachment to God.
Right.
Not to mention the attachment to Torah. So somehow it's all wrapped up in the land. And the land has this incredible power because you're actually living it 24/7. You should see these views off these balconies.
Yeah.
Got to tell you, I mean, I looked at a house there. The guy said, "Well, this is where King David had his battles." So I'm looking at the Beverly Center in my house in L.A. And then in this backyard I got where King David had his battles.
Yeah.
There's something that's transcends the usual way of looking at land when you're in the biblical land. And visually, the air, the views itself, the rocks, the stones, the texture of the land, the wind. You run through and you drive through and you feel you're in the Bible. So it's not surprising that the religious Zionists have gotten so attached to the land. And when you see that there are forces that are working to get you out of there, then the attachment gets even deeper.
Yeah.
Because then you feel threatened. But I think what they've seen is that the attachment got so deep that they lost sight of other Jewish imperatives, which is your attachment to other Jews, your attachment to peace, your attachment to God, and so forth. It was all wrapped up around the land. So they're going through a sort of a transition right now where they're seeing there's more to Judaism than this land. Very difficult.
Yeah, there are so many foundations to Judaism, and
you can't pick one over the other. You just can't.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. Now, on the same token, you could say the same thing about peace.
Right.
And you can say, you can become a peace fanatic.
Yeah.
And by picking, acting like peace the way they're acting with land, that can get you into a similar kind of blinding problem. And this is, if there's one lesson at all to get, it's the lesson from Chief Rabbi Sachs. It's yes and no.
Yeah.
It's yes and no. Land is not higher than peace, and peace is not higher than land. And this is the most difficult thing about Judaism, is the equality of ideals. Because when one is greater than the other, it's easy. You just pick this one. Kobe and LeBron. Who's better?
Yeah.
When one is better, but when one is not greater than the other, when peace and land are equal, that's when you have complications. That's when it becomes very, very difficult. And that's what Judaism is, continuing that difficulty. And the great men that I know in Israel, the Rabbi Riskins, the ones, the Jews I admire the most, the Yossi Klein Halevis, the Mika Goodmans, even the Michael Melchiors, are the ones who are able to simultaneously maintain two ideals at the same level.
Yeah.
And it's very painful. And I see it. I see Rabbi Riskin lives in Judea and Samaria.
Yeah.
He lives it. But his love for fellow Jews, his love for peace, I also see it. It's also palpable. So he's constantly struggling between sort of balancing out these competing and equal ideals. Like Guevara, like, the idea of compassion and justice, these things that compete. Whereas I think in your world, you have a tendency to sort of put an ideal above another.
Well, sometimes, yeah. See, I don't see it quite as you do. I see in certain situations one value or one law does override. But just like in Jewish law, it tells you how to handle competing values. So sometimes I think you should die for the land, and sometimes I think you should sacrifice land for peace.
Well, that's
but
what
in every situation I believe there usually is an ideal.
Well,
there is a best solution.
What complicates it even further is there are moments when the ideal does supersede the other. For instance, in a state of war, when you're being attacked, at that moment, the ideal
Torah,
go up.
Yeah, grab your guns and get to work.
Right, absolutely. But then if you take that moment and extrapolate it to a time of not war, when you're not being attacked, then that's when you get in trouble. And I think for a lot of Jews, they feel they're in a constant state of war. And that's why you will not see them go to a peace rally, because they feel they're in a constant state of war. And some Jews don't.
One thing I like this week's Parsha and in the Torah is how it describes the Jews going from place to place and place. And the Jews are kind of like circling in the desert for 40 years. And I think that's so much like our lives. Like our lives aren't linear. We don't leave Egypt and go to the Promised Land. We all wander in the desert. We go forward and we go back. We stay in one place for 20 years. We stay in another place for one night. But we're always wandering, and we're often going backwards, and often progress is not at all discernible. In
fact, I had read something that there's 42 of them.
Yeah, 42 places of the Torah list.
And in our lives.
They represent different way stations in our lives, and they have interesting names, such as one of the names is Kivrot Hata'ava, which means the burial place of desire and lust. That is a place I have not visited yet, but it's coming up.
It's the whole Bamidbar is about a journey.
Yeah, so many commentators find deeper meanings and moral lessons lurking behind the recitation and spellings of the name itself. Another thing I found interesting is that sometimes intermarriage between tribes is permitted, and sometimes it's forbidden, such as the daughters of, I remember the daughters of Zelophehad were forbidden to marry outside of their tribe. So we have here in Los Angeles many Persian Jews who don't want their children to marry outside of other Persian Jews. And then we have Persian Jews who want to marry outside of the clan. And so I think, just as with the Torah, there's a case to be made for marrying within your own group, and there's a case to be made for marrying a different group still within Judaism.
Well, it's back to the fears, fears that you have of losing what you've got. There's the Syrian community on the East Coast is notorious for that. It's, my God, if you're Lebanese, like, you're not Jewish. Yeah, they're incredibly fanatic about that. But that's going away with the new generations.
Is it?
Oh yeah, That is something that's got a clock ticking. With the more new generations. I mean, you see it in Montreal, where my parents' generation and the Moroccans would marry among themselves, and then next generation less so, and then next generation even less. With time, that stuff goes away. Because remember, I mean, these are 2,000-year habits. You know, the Persians, they go way back.